Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. Our topic for today is how to achieve a bot on every desk. Before we begin, just wanted to send in a reminder. We sent out an email asking everyone on their thoughts on what does a bot on every desk means to them. We have this contest, so if you haven't sent in your entry and if you'd like to send one, feel free to send it as a question, and we will take care of it. So let's get started. We'll begin with a quick round of introductions. I am Thakar. I'm the COO at Accelirate. I've been doing RPA for the past 5 years. Really excited about the topic today. Along with me, we have KJ Fenton from UiPath.
So KJ Fenton, I go by KJ, senior sales engineer here, been involved with RPA pretty close to 5 years, I would say. I've been involved with UiPath for the past 4. Got my start as a consultant, went from development all the way to the sales side. I kind of like the sales side, which is probably why I'm here. But I'll be providing a good chunk of the demos today. I'll pass it on to Ashish.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm currently a client engagement director with Accelerate. I help our clients implement their RPA programs. I've been doing RPA for 4 years now, and RPA has grown, so has we, and looking forward for today's webinar.
So a bot for every desk or a robot for every person is a beloved topic, right? It comes up every time you are at Forward, which, by the way, it's next week. It's a topic that gets a lot of attention, and we thought it would be a good to kind of demystify it with some really cool demos, and that's what we have KJ here for. But before we jump into the demos, let's just step back a little bit and if we look at the UiPath ecosystem, right? So you have on one end, you have the robots and you have the attended robots. And 4 or 5 years ago, that was the only way we could do automation. But now, just looking at the slide, you see there are so many other ways that RPA can be implemented, right? For example, you have Studio X, which promotes citizen development. In a way, it's actually the easiest possible way to get a robot on your desk. Whether you know programming or not, you can use Studio X to build your own robot. Today, we want to dive deeper, and KJ, I really want your opinion. If we look at the purple column, right, the fact that we can now engage with these automations through all these different ways, can you help us kind of break the jargon down? What is apps? What is assistant, ActionCenter, chatbots?
Yeah, for sure. And I won't read it top down. I'll actually do it in a little bit of an order. But yeah, so assistant is actually it's really the GUI behind a robot. So if we think about automation, right, I think everyone candidly understands there's an executable that's going to live on some virtual machine, local machine, whatever, that's going to execute a process. Assistant's a GUI for that essentially allows us to run things in what we call an attended fashion. And there's some other cool things that I'll show you, which is what the demo is designed to do today. But it's the GUI for that, to allow you to have a single pane of glass to see all the automations that are available to you, etc. If we go below that to ActionCenter, it's that start of human in the loop, which is really the focus behind this webinar. It essentially takes inputs from the workflow that you're working towards, puts it in some sort of form, which is what I'm going to show you, and then allows a user to make a decision on that without necessarily needing that UiPath assistant or a robot on their machine. And if we take that a step further, what if instead of having a form that's waiting for an approval, what if we could flip the script on that and allow users to pass data into some sort of single pane of glass and trigger your automation workforce? That's apps. So when you think about the whole engage pillar, it's not just now, oh, I have a set process, oh, I know I'm going to run it. We can now allow humans to have those trigger endpoints downstream. And if we bubble that up, chatbots are exactly like that, right? I think everyone understands what a chatbot is. We integrate with them pretty seamlessly. Easiest example I can think of, when I renew my registration at the North Carolina DMV, I actually interact with a chatbot. I give it my license code. I give it my license plate number. My license ID, and then from there pulls everything. This is what you owe. I submit my payment, and we're done. All done through a chatbot. The way that would theoretically work I interact with the chatbot. Chatbot triggers robotic workforce downstream to give me the required outputs that I need. So was that helpful, Harsh? I just want to be sure,
Yeah.
but that's kind of breaks it down.
I mean, when we, two years ago, when we used to build all these unattended automations,
Right.
we would use Excel to communicate with the end user, but now we don't have to use that, right?
Correct.
So, we could use Assistant or ActionCenter. And
whatever.
Let's go deeper into the ActionCenter a little bit, right? So could you give us some more examples, and then at your convenience go over to the demo?
Sure, of course. Yeah. So if we look at this, right, I'm going to read it exactly like it is because it's a super simple slide and I think it makes sense, right? So automating work from start to finish with human robot interaction. So there's actions, right, that are humans going to perform that are going to trigger quote unquote processes, and that's strung into long running workflows. Using the example that Harsh talks about before, right? What we're really thinking about is you'd have some configuration sitting in an Excel. Once that Excel was pre-populated, you would trigger that from some sort of, control room, orchestrator, some workflow mechanism, whatever, and it would automate things, right? But if we think about the context of what actually matters, humans are smarter than that, right? And humans can actually add logic to processes. And usually if we look at this, and this happens all the time, especially in like the healthcare space where claims processing, great example, right? What if we could have the robot gather all of the information for a specific claimant, put it into a specific single pane, and then let us as the agent go validate that the information gathered is accurate, and then from there create a task, get the single pane, look at it, and then once we click approve or deny on that claim, we can do phase 2 of that process. So if we think about that, bubbling that up, your end-to-end process is the whole life of the claim from the minute that someone submits it all the way to the end where we actually pay out the claim or say, hey, by the way, we're not gonna do that. In the middle is where a human will normally spend some time actually making some legitimate decisions. But all this other nonsense that happens there, it's not nonsense, it's necessary, but it's mundane, it's tedious, right? No one needs to do that. So like right here, we're literally working with another healthcare company here in the Carolinas. They want to help the grievance and appeals process. And we asked them, we're like, why haven't you automated that today? They're like, well, we can't do it end to end. We're like, well, stop doing that. They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, break the process up. I was like, what's the hard part? They're like, well, when we just have to validate all the information's accurate. So we have our, claim agents going through, and then once they consolidate all of it, they take a look at it. I'm like, well, then why don't you have robots go consolidate it? They're like, well, and we're like, no, not well. It can happen, right? And then we introduced this technology and they said, oh, wow, okay. So that's really what it is that no matter what the process becomes, we really want to try and break the mold. You're obviously going to have unattended processes, not going to change that. But there are going to be times where that process sounds quote unquote too complex when in reality, 2% of that process is complex. So why not create an ActionCenter task to help someone approve it, suspend the workflow and continue it down? That's what this is designed to do. So that's really what we're going to be targeting today.
And that's really powerful, right? So for there are within processes, you have the happy path, and then you have all these exceptions. In the old way of doing things, we would ignore the exceptions, but now we can use this technology to address or have the human address the exception and then hand it back to the bot. It just increases the scope of what RPA can do today.
Sure.
And it also brings automation into your mission critical transactions. So great to hear. Let's jump into some demos and see how this really works.
Cool. Awesome. So yeah, so I will, what I'm going to do is go through a few demos today. We're going to end with the ActionCenter example. The way the cadence is going to go is I'm going to run an automation from my assistant, right? And then show you the code, show you how I architected that, put it together. I'm not going to rebuild anything today, but you'll see I built it. I promise you, I built everything. And then from that, it will also be, we'll delve deeper into, like I said, it'll be a demo, show the code, demo, show the code, demo, show the code. And then obviously we'll pass it back and have a, just kind of an open-ended Q&A after that, after we finish the deck that's here. Okay. But just want to make sure everyone is understood on the cadence. It's going to step from very, very basic engaging with a human to actually creating an ActionCenter task, showing that human in the loop component and bringing this all together. Because I think outside of just ActionCenter, there is validity in just basic prompting a user for an input. So we just want to make sure that you understand all of that exists within the stack and the engage pillar. Okay. So is that fair? All good at this point? Awesome, cool. Let me take over and share my screen here. Got everything good to go. I think I have, yep, got all three pulled up. Awesome, cool. Yep, so I will do that. Go to screen 2 right here. So you've got my nice little screen, my nice little reboot. Work should not suck. And we're gonna make sure that it doesn't. Using ActionCenter, all right? So if we start in a basic principle, this is the UiPath assistant. All these processes here are things that I have built for myself. And then you also can link that to a quote unquote shared folder as well. Long story short, for those of you who may not understand, very simple. Ooh, got a thing in the QA for later. Yep, perfect. From that, what you can do is assign people to a specific folder, assign automations to that folder, and then any user can run any number of processes. So if we think about basics, right? Starting from the very beginning, I don't think I need to show this workflow, but right here, let's say I wanted to run a process and just prompt a user with like a message box at the end of some automation saying like, hey, it's done, right? Rather than send an email, we can do something where we prompt a user with a message box. Right here, it's a hello world process. I click a button, the whole workflow is I dragged and dropped in a message box and it says hello world, right? Most basic inception of what we call quote unquote human in the loop. This robot is running and will continue running until I close that message box. So technically my robot could run 24/7, 365 with this process if I never closed it. Very simple example. But if we wanted to start digging deeper, what some of our functionality that UiPath has that others in the market don't necessarily have is that ability to engage with a user. So what I did is I have a workflow here. It's called a city and state lookup. It's connected to the USPS backend APIs. I'll show you that here in a moment. But right here on the API, it prompts me with what we call an input dialog. So now we're going to step 2. Right? From this, I'm going to give it a zip code. It's going to ping using an API in the backend, give me the city and state back. Very simple example, but I figure if I'm working in some sort of tax or finance scenario where I'm looking at zip codes 24/7, rather than Googling it and figuring it out, I could use this as a little assistant as well. Okay, so very simple, getting to that point of human in the loop from suspending the workflow. I give it my zip code 28216. And here you go, right? I am here in Charlotte, North Carolina, right? So being able to pass those inputs back on a message box, make it dynamic in nature. This is kind of that step 2. I'm going to take us to step 3 and then ultimately step 4, but that's really what we're talking about here, okay? And how we built that, right? And is right here. So in the workflow, I had to build some sort of workflow to do it. So right here, I just use standard activities. If I didn't have a zip code or if I had a zip code already provided in the arguments, it would have said, give me this, and it was already provided. If not, input dialog, I log this message. And then right here, I built an HTTP request, right? And that HTTP request, you gave it an endpoint. I passed in specific parameters based on what we saw. And then from that, I used a simple deserialize XML to get the result. And then I just grabbed the XML results, assigned it to city, assigned it to state, and then eventually I put that in a message box. So as you can see, right, a little bit of coding there, but I had to drag in specific parameters to achieve it, right? So we're not eliminating the whole concept of understanding your process end to end. We're just simply providing different ways to engage and get dynamic inputs to pass them into the workflows. Okay, just taking a moment, check here. Harsh, is there anything you want to contribute on that? Otherwise, I'll continue on.
No, this is really interesting, right? So you could actually, if your system of record has an API, and if you want to look up, let's say the last conversation you had with that customer.
Sure.
So this really gives a lot of information and interaction back to the end user. That's great.
Right. Yeah, and this is just one example, right? Now, as we start thinking about it, what are some other things where they have API? And it's not just APIs. This could have been, and I'll show you where this is bubbled up to, is we go to step 2. We talk about forms. Everyone likes to talk about like creating a form. We did the same thing back in 2018, right? Or 2019 maybe was the forms designer. I'm not entirely sure. Someone will probably call me on that. I hope you do. Let my boss know. Anyway, so on forms right here, right, bubbling that up, right, now we can be prompted. There's a couple different things we can do. I'm going to use the zip code lookup, and then I'm going to fork this other one, right? And before forms, we had this. It's that input dialog we saw before, right? But when I click this, now I can prompt myself with a different look and feel, different form, so on and so forth for a city and state lookup. Going to do the same thing, but now right there, I can add validation steps. I can start adding these other things to make that experience as seamless as possible, right? I do the same thing, and then just that was an API. This one's going to use the user interface, so you're not limited to it. Same concept. I click perform lookup. It's going to pass my zip code into there, do that, and bring it back. This could work unattended. This could work attended, right? Trigger an unattended process, pass the inputs back. You get the idea. Same output, right? How we built that, let me just close that to make it easier. How I built that right here, input dialog, log the message based on choice. What was the process, right? I literally opened the browser, typed in the zip code that I grabbed from the form, clicked find, get text, right? It's the same workflow. So it really boils down to, if you have APIs, you need to use the UI, you want to invoke a Python script, you name it, what is the workflow you're trying to achieve? Usually where the crux of every automation, and Harsh and Ashish, I'm sure you guys can talk about this, the crux is always, I don't know how to get the input. Well, human does. So why not find a way to just, parameterize that, right? That's really what we're shooting towards here, right? Got another example, and then eventually I'll run the ActionCenter demo to bring this all home. But yeah, anything y'all want to contribute on that?
Now, one common question we get is, these forms are great, but how do you make them look like they're part of, they're just not, they look good and they follow, let's say, the UI guidelines that all our internal apps have. So is there things that the developer can do to make them look good?
Sure. I am not a form designer, but put me on the spot a little bit, but that's okay. I'll go into the form. So if you have anyone who actually has HTML coding experience, that's how I think you can achieve it, right? So if I wanted to, in this form here, I could go to advanced, I could go to this HTML content, pull it in. And then from there, if you know the content, you know your CSS class, your attributes, your values, etc., you could do that. So if I actually went and found like an image online, I think I can do it. Let me actually see. Let me see if I can do this on the spot. Here we go. Let me just search UiPath logo, see if I can get a source here. Put me on the spot. Why not? Let's see if I can do it. All right, cool. So let's see, inspect. I think that's what I can grab right there. Let me grab that, see if that works. It is HTML. There we go. Let's just see what happens if I copy this whole thing, huh? But you get the idea, right? But yes, you could totally follow the guidelines. This may work, this may not, but I think you get the idea, right? Where you can throw that in. Did this work? Okay, the preview didn't necessarily work. But from that, if you had an image source, you knew what to do, etc., you could edit that. So the answer is yes. It just depends on really all the content that you're trying to provide. But yeah, and this also does bubble up as well. Not going to cover it on this webinar per se. But you could definitely also leverage our apps capability as well. That takes this a step further, just like we saw on the engage pillar. And then from that, that actually allows you to, wow, that's a really long content there. All right, maybe I'll just do that, delete it. Okay, cool. I'm gonna cancel. You could also just bubble that up in apps and remove the assistant component, and then just give you that single pane of glass for multiple different processes as well. Okay, but yeah, the answer is yeah, right? Just depends on how advanced that your developers are there. And usually you can find your web developers internally to be able to make that happen. Yep.
Perfect.
Yep, cool. Yeah, I tried to do it. I just didn't know the source. I've done it before, but whatever. What a Stack Overflow.
You didn't have to.
No, it's fine. Hey, I just figured I'd show it, right? But yeah, but building these are super simple. You just pull in a text field, you define it, and then link it on arguments, which is super simple. And to show you how that worked, because some people may be wondering how we did that, what you would actually do is in the form fields collection, you would actually link this field, whatever the field is in the form, to the value that's here, and that's how you pass those inputs, okay? So I just wanted to show that. All right. In that same vein, you're not limited to just running automations. You can use it to do this. For those of you in the healthcare space, this might be favorable to you to watch as well. They're in the same vein. A lot of companies will have like what they call start my day bots, where they'll click a button and it'll open some preset applications for them. We can do the same thing using the same logic, and I'll show you that code here in a moment. But let's say right here, I've got a simple form and I've got UI demo and Acme that I run every morning. I can click this button. It'll pull my creds, right, from Orchestrator, throw them into here, click login, and now I'm ready to go with this automation. I can do the same thing with a web browser, right? Just really showing a little bit of art of the possible here. This has been something that we've run into a lot, actually, when we start getting higher and wider. Like I said, especially with healthcare companies, y'all have some form of this. We can do the same thing. We've got more extensive capabilities on that, right? And then from that, I think it's actually waiting for this page to get to that point, unless we already signed in. But you get the idea. Go to the form, close that, closes down. Oh, I bet you it's because I needed to be on the other screen. That's funny. Path.com. Let me break my own bots while I'm here. That's still running. Yeah, there you go. I guess I got to fix that. And then closing UI demo, you get the idea, right? Being able to open and close applications, so on and so forth. Once again, if we look at the workflow, super simple here. Start my day, right? On the button, open UI demo. What is that? Open the application. Close is very simple. Attach window, close it, right? Super, simple like that. Same thing with open, close, and then obviously on close form. Don't have to do anything. I have it in the form, close on submit, true, you're done. All right. So yeah, so that is that. Anything y'all like to contribute there on the Accelerate side?
No, I think this is great. We can jump to the next one.
Cool. So this is what we've all come for, right? Is ActionCenter. So let's assume, right, we've got a workflow where we read from this data here, and you've got like some fields here. And let's say if a cache value was 10,000 or more, if we were iterating through it, we need to send that for some approval. So insert whatever scenario you got, approvals, denials, validation checks, QA, you name it, right? Whatever the criteria value is, you can program that into a robot to achieve that, okay? So right here, there's that. So what I'm actually doing is the robot will read from this queue, okay? And we'll look at some of the transactions. It'll look very similar to what we saw. If this cache value right here is greater than 10,000, it is going to create an ActionCenter task, which is actually going to suspend the workflow, because I actually have to run this one from Studio. I'll show you the workflow here in a moment. And then I have to go complete the task in order to complete the demo. In a actual scenario, it can complete the task and continue processing. What's going to happen is the workflow goes into a suspended state. Once the task is completed, then it can trigger an automation downstream to continue the parameters. I was just letting you know I have to run it locally, so it suspends it, and I have to complete it before I proceed, just for demo purposes, because it's just one machine. Okay, but theoretically, create as many tasks as you want, suspends the workflow, have unattended robots on the back end. Okay, so what it looks like is this. First thing we're going to do is go get the transaction. Very simple, and I've actually got the status because all of this works in the background. Okay, get the transaction item. If nothing's there, it'll tell us no more transactions, and we're good. If there is still a transaction, we're going to get the cache value, and if that cache value is greater than or equal to 10,000, we are going to create an ActionCenter task here with this create form task, same form designer that we saw before. I'll take a look and show you what it is, but same form designer. Oh, I did actually add one here. Yeah, look at this. Here we go. HTML element. Let me look at what I had. Catching myself from before. Here you go. Hey, look, I found it. Yay. Right? So you can actually customize it, right? So there you go. Totally forgot I had that. So yeah, so right there, it's going to create the value from here. It's going to put them in automatically, and then I can approve or reject, and I can add comments as well. And I'll show you how all that works. All right. And then you'll see here, there's a wait for task and resume. And then right here, if it was approved, set it to approve. If not, it wasn't approved, you see why. But once again, same logic. And then if it's less than 10,000, it's just going to move on. So very simple logic once again, right? What is the process we're trying to do? If anything's over 10,000, creates the ActionCenter task. All right. So how this works in action, it's pretty simple. I'm just going to run it in debug here. So you can see where it actually will quote unquote hang up, where I'll suspend the workflow right here, gathering the next transaction, got the specific transaction item from the queue, right? It's 10,000 or more. It's creating that task here. Got it. See, so now you see execution has been suspended, right? And waiting for external events to complete. That is because I do have this wait for form task complete just to show the full cycle. So now what I would do, go to here, go to my actions tab. It is, I believe there's a question on it. It is a named user here, so you can assign based on different folders and so on and so forth. We see the ActionCenter demo has been created based on the there's an in process transaction there. I go to here, simply assign this to myself because I'm the only admin. I look at it, I hit approve, right? I'm going to mark it as complete. Let's say I looked at it, did whatever I needed to do, blah, blah, blah. Then from that, I can go into here, right? I'm resuming it. This would have automatically been done. I'm just hanging it up because I'm, running it for demo purposes. And based on that, it knows that it was approved. It'll tell us task approved, moving on. And I'm going to keep doing this for a few, and I'll show you the rejection here as well. But Haris, Ashish, anything you want to contribute while I'm running through this? Just wanted to, just kind of bring it home here.
Yeah, no, this is such a common pattern, right? That we see anything from invoice processing to underwriting to claims.
Yep.
Applies in every industry, right? So it's like I said earlier in the webinar, we would use spreadsheets, we would use queues,
right,
or we would break down the entire process into smaller automations. Now it's just one seamless integration. So that's
exactly. Yep, that's exactly it. Yep.
And
right there,
from the development, sorry to cut. Okay, from development perspective as well, we have sometimes cut down the process into 2 processes, and it was increasing the development timelines. And with this ActionCenter, we can develop the whole process as one, and that reduces our time to develop and deploy the process sooner in production.
Yep, all agreed to everything that's said. Yep, I'm just gonna add a comment here and just do yay. Cool, but I'm going to approve it this time. Cool. And that's really it, right? Just showing kind of a little bit of human in the loop. So it really just boils down to, once again, what's the problem you're trying to solve? Where is it? Where's the pain point? Let's figure out if we can use ActionCenter to achieve it. There you go. Right there. Yep, no transaction data, and it should be done. Oh yeah, that's going to stop. Cool, awesome. So there you go. So that is ActionCenter demo in a nutshell, and we can see all the completed actions here. And then if we actually wanted to go look at those transactions too, kind of cool to show how it can link to Orchestrator and do that as well. Because maybe even what happens is we use a queue trigger at Orchestrator to run this process to create the actual ActionCenter tasks. If we go look at the actual transactions, we can see some of the exceptions that I had in comments as well. So if I look here, failed, right there, it actually provided the reason that we saw before. So just showing a little bit art of the possible there. Yep. But that's all I had for ActionCenter. So I guess I'll pass it back to y'all.
All right. So we'll dive deeper into some of the examples and some use cases. Then let me share my screen real quick.
And we have some questions. Do we want to wait till the end to field those, or should we field them now?
We can wait till the end.
Okay.
We just have a few more slides, and then we can jump right into the questions.
Sure. Awesome. Yeah, and feel free to keep asking questions if you want. I just saw all the 3. We'll answer those, but yeah, feel free to keep asking.
All right. I think I have the slide up. Okay. So yeah. So just KJ. So how does this all tie in together? Right now, in old days we had attended, unattended bots, and now we have this whole ActionCenter where we have human in the loop. So if you can talk more about hybrid versus partially unattended, because a lot of times when we talk to customers or end users, they get confused as to what exactly the bot can do.
Right. Yeah, so if we look at kind of a hybrid model, right here, there's a couple different things we can do. If we look at hybrid, I'm just looking at the example here, captures address change info in a form, triggers on brush to update the address. So what could probably happen at this point in the hybrid approach from an ActionCenter perspective, I also could see this being like a simple forms or an attended exercise. But what would happen is, based on some sort of email trigger and address change request, robot will go through, go look at the information that was provided, look at the older information, the new, present that in the form. That is the quote unquote hybrid approach. Upon clearing the action, right, which is what we saw by approve or rejection, that would then send it, trigger the job downstream. And then from that, partially unattended is actually pretty simple. It would just be where kind of our Excel example as well, where someone would just kind of put the info in and do it. But you see invoice processing here. What I think this might actually be quote unquote partially unattended. Maybe what the robot will do is go gather all the info and present the validation station, right? From our document understanding to a user, they go approve that information and then it works downstream. So I think don't necessarily get too confused about hybrid and partially unattended. It's really the inputs, right? How are we triggering the human? And actually, I think this fits into both Vithal's and Deborah's question about bot processing one while it's in a suspended state and continuing with the transaction? That answer is yes. So in both of those examples that we just discussed, what actually could happen is your dispatcher can go create tasks over and over and over again. And in the workflow, you're going to see that create form task. What's going to happen is based on that action, you're going to link it and that workflow gets suspended. And then on the back end, you're going to have that wait form task incomplete, but that's going to be in a separate process, right? So the answer is yes, you just have to architect it right and have robots on hand to process it. Because if, like in this example, I didn't have the action task linked to anything, so I just created it and it's done. So it's a queuing mechanism. But if you wanted it to actually process, you would link that action ID, pass the input, you'd have robots sitting and waiting and ready to go to be able to achieve that. So as I mentioned, right, don't get too caught up on hybrid versus partially unattended. Think about how you actually want to get the data to the user to validate it, and we'll figure out if it makes sense for ActionCenter or apps or a form or input or whatever it is to help achieve that, right? I don't want to get so cut. Obviously, this is the focus on ActionCenter, and it does help a ton, but don't get necessarily focused on that's the only way to do it, because there's other ways to achieve it as well.
Okay, so I'm curious to know, like, and maybe it also, there was one question similar to this where how does a user know that this task is for itself, right? So, or how does the architect design the bot in a way that the right task goes to the right person? Could you give us more overview on the roles and how actually the distribution of these tasks happen?
Sure, and let me look right now, and I think this actually fits into the Q&A question about segregating users in ActionCenter. The way you segregation of duties is actually quite simple. So let me actually put answer live there, right? Done, and answer that. So the way it actually works is you would, in this, I actually had access to the actions in my workspace folder. If it was in a shared folder, I'd have a user, they would be able to go access the actions tab because it's linked to a specific folder. So that's how you do the RBAC. In terms of how you actually would alert them, I'm looking right now to see on the ActionCenter task if there's a way to, I believe there is. If not, it's really simple. I believe you can link on the form task and give it a specific reference, and then on the reference or you could put it into a specific storage bucket and add users to it. There usually is some sort of administration that's going to happen at the ActionCenter level to assign it. The best way I can think about this is your notification queues from everything, right? Any webhooks, your Zapiers, your Slacks, your Microsoft Teams, your whatever, email. Easiest way to architect this as of now is when that task is completed, have the distro right there. So in the step, like we take your example, Harsh, about exceptions, where we wanted to route those instead of, we would just say out of sight, out of mind, just have someone go look at them, creating the task. It might be as, oh, who's the QA team responsible for handling the exceptions? All 5 of them are an email distro. Cool. Send email message, email distro. Usually the easiest way to do it, if you wanted to get granular, like I said, if you have specific folders for specific people and you write logic and you create different storage buckets for them, that's going to be the easiest way to do it. It doesn't look like there's an actual way to send it. I can follow up if needed, but when you architect it, figure out the way that you would want to notify them and just build it into the workflow. That's the easiest way to answer that question. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, that's great. So, so let's jump into art of the possible, some use case examples, and then I think we have 2 where we dive deeper after that, and then we can revisit some of the questions. Now, pick your favorite, and maybe we can start from there, KJ.
Yeah, mine in terms of like what I would see from use case examples.
Yeah, and obviously people are more. The whole ML model using AI Fabric and document understanding is definitely a glamorous use case that comes up every conversation. So maybe we can dive deeper there too.
Sure. Yeah, and I'll discuss it, right? So if you think about how ActionCenter fits into this, right? We'll talk about like vendor management and invoice processing in general. It sounds glamorous. UiPath, we have out of the box models for invoices, purchase orders, receipts, utility bills. We're piloting IDs, passports, legal contracts. Remember, we're not an OCR company. We just happen to have the ability to do it, right? So, and that's how we string it into the workflows. However, right, we also have that data manager capability to allow you to build your models, build your own models. Whether you're going to build your own or use our out of the box models, you can always train that for your specific company. This has nothing to do with AI ActionCenter, but it's super, super critical from the validation component. So if we think about reading an invoice, right? Your invoices may be different than the model that we have, but let's say our model does pretty well and you want to retrain it to get it better. You could theoretically use standard invoice processing people, right? Whatever, name or, role that they have, and using ActionCenter to do it. So what would happen is robots will go process the documents, route exceptions or ones that need a little bit more validation to a human using validation station. And on the results of ActionCenter in the validation station, there's a train extractor scope activity that allows you to pass those inputs back. Then your data science team who's looking at the model can look at that, test it, see if it's been better for prod, redeploy that. And now you're creating a continuous cycle of people actually training your models accordingly. So I think in an ActionCenter example, it's one of those cool little cruxes that you can actually use your people to build better models. That sounds scary, but in reality, you're putting checks on it anyway. They're going to have to QA it. So why not actually teach them, oh, look at the key vector pair here. And now moving forward, when it sees that document again, now it knows to process it. It may not even be an exception next time it gets passed through. So I think that's the easiest and kind of glamorous way to look at it. The ActionCenter piece of it's really simple, but I think it's super, super powerful to actually allow business users to help IT actually build better models, which I think stems into the whole AI center conversation and actually leveraging AI and so on and so forth. But it's one way of doing it. And that same automotive company I was talking about, they are actually looking at doing this for their own internal organization as well. They're currently offshoring their whole processing department, and they pay a pretty penny to do it. And they're like, well, can we use UiPath to do it? And we can probably handle about 60 to 70 of them today with out of the box stuff. So just things to keep in mind. And then they plan on using ActionCenter for the other 30 for their own internal people. So yeah, was that helpful? I just wanted to be sure.
Yeah, that's an excellent example. It also brings in how human and AI can collaborate together, right? So wherever AI comes up short, the humans can actually point and retrain the AI using human in the loop. So
exactly. Yep.
Pretty amazing. Let's jump to the next slide, which is again the same example, invoice processing.
Yeah, it's literally the same thing, just a different flair, right? Yeah. So right here, they wanted to try and reduce 30% of man hours, right? So right there, using an AI OCR capability, what did they need to do? So if you look at the architecture, right, invoice is going into their procurement system, robots are going to process the invoice, pass it to their BPM tool. From there, on the BPM tool, triggers the robot to run it through DU processing. That's the technical part of it. But from the solution, it's exactly what we just discussed and figuring out how UiPath fits into that. But if you look at the ROI on that, 60% reduction in invoice processing time, that's crazy. For such a simple little fix, right? That, it's not like we came up with like this amazing, like, oh, we can do invoices better than, the next company. It was more, how do we make this seamless to let the robotic workforce actually use that? That's the value prop of UiPath, right? And then obviously establishing the, common global process. So ActionCenters where all of those validations went, right? So that way you could actually go look, and then they were using it to retrain. And then just obviously now they can actually see the status throughout the entire workflow. Because if an ActionCenter task was created on a specific invoice and it wasn't completed, they know now SLA times. And if we bubble that up to like process mining or task mining or whatever, right, now you can see that whole phase of the life cycle there. So it was literally what I just described. I totally didn't necessarily realize I was going to do it, but it's the same concept, right? So it's just using people to actually just handle that 40%, right? But the 60%, right, of everything else is probably done. So yeah,
it's amazing how we are solving a business problem, right? I mean, you can look at it as an engineering problem and say, well, sure. Can we support all types of formats, all types of invoices, and how much of this is feasible, how much of that is not feasible? But at the end of the day, if you look at it as a business problem, you're optimizing your transaction by 60%. So that's kind of amazing. let's jump into the next one, and this is the last, and we'll turn over to Q&A after that.
Yep. Yeah, so let me remember this, just still invoice processing again. I'm thinking with this one, if I remember correctly, yeah, okay. So this was a little bit different in the sense that they wanted to just create the collaboration. They wanted to use ServiceNow specifically, and I can tie this to another retail company that we have, right? But right there, OCR reading the results were checked by a person in charge, and then after verification, it was registered in SAP. So this process required someone to be in the loop. So if we think about that same example, ServiceNow is probably going to their procurement system. Then from that, it was passing it to the, AI OCR, which would be our document understanding capability. So ServiceNow tickets were the BPM workflow. So step one, gather data from procurement. Step two, pass it through document understanding. Step three, have a human validate. And then step four is processing it into SAP. So if we actually think about the business problem there, the business problem is it's probably not streamlined for a QA person to go check that, right? So can you use existing tools to do that? The answer is yeah. So I think when we think about it from that standpoint, you can see quick implementation, 4.5 months. If you think about trying to change a BPM workflow, forget about it. There's no way you're doing it in 4 months, right? So, you think about it that way. And just from there, and then even there, I had alluded to it on the last slide, right? Further sophistication for process mining for continuous improvement. If they can link and actually look at the back end, see what's happening, measure their SLAs, right? Everything eventually, I think we need to start really as a collective group of technologists need to start influencing the business decision of this. We know the technologies that work. We know the technologies that doesn't, right? You can look at me and play stump the chump all day. Totally cool, right? At the end of the day, it's going to be a business impact, right? How do we solve the business problem that's there? We have the answers. So how can we evangelize the people who are smart enough to explain it to the powers that be? I think this is a really cool example of it because the technology, as you saw, really isn't that complex. But the fact that we can actually enhance the experience with just a little bit of a switch in thinking, I think that's really what we're driving home here. So from this same company, right, just infused ActionCenter in 2 different areas and saved tons of time, tons of effort, and they can actually now look at those pain points differently and say, oh, okay, maybe we need to actually talk about the customer experience. And I know every person who's talked to a business analyst and didn't get the requirements you wanted, you wish you could. So let's actually figure out a way to do that. So yeah, I digress there, but yeah, it was just this simple example of just sometimes required, sometimes it's not. But I think there's a bigger impact of just, hitting the business, which I think is exactly what a bot for every desktop means.
Yeah, so we, as we scheduled the webinar, we asked the audience, what does a bot for every desk mean? And we got some interesting entries, and some of them are here. Thank you for participating. I really like, Yeah, I really like the one where this guy says every computer can be turned into a tool for nefarious purposes. I'm going to take that positively, and
I am too. Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's really what you can make it out to be, right? I mean, it is an assistive technology that you could use, and just like the last bullet that says, maximizing efficiency for all the staff to reduce tedious tasks. Because once you reduce the tedious tasks, you can apply yourself to do more creative things and solve more challenging problems. So that's really amazing. Let's jump over to the questions. We have a few minutes, and we can probably address some of the questions which we haven't. So is a literal robot for every person? Well, this seems more like a comment, right?
Sure.
Is a literal robot for every person necessary? Should we really aim for robot impacting every person? Sure. I mean, at the end of the day, the technology is there. It's art of the possible, and what you do with it.
Yeah. Just to add on that as well. I mean, a robot for every person, right, can sometimes be, candidly a little cost prohibitive, right? Just with the cost of a robot. So can we look at it using it in a way to engage? And I think that's why we have ActionCenter. It's why we have apps and these other capabilities to trigger. And I actually think that stems into other tools in AREP beyond RPA, like API integrations, chatbots. This is where we want to enable, and, keep me honest here, guys, but, RPA is one piece of the puzzle. It's a big piece of the puzzle, but it's one piece of it. You have existing capabilities already. So how can we fit really these technologies in to enhance that experience, right? Because I've always heard 8 million times, oh, we can build a VB script for that. Okay, cool. Does that take you 3 months? Okay, cool. We can build something in a week. You see what I mean? Like when we can start enhancing that pipeline, enhancing that experience and making this part to enable the center of excellence, it's fine. But if you have an API built for it, use it. If you've got a Python script, use it. If you've got a VB script, use it. If you have a PowerShell script, like you see what I mean? Those exist. Don't replace that. Well, when the opportunities don't exist or you don't have the capability, you now have a tool like UiPath to be able to engage with humans and really create that seamless experience that you're looking for. So I think it just integrates and just kind of fits in. I call it middleware. I don't know if that's the right term, but I think that it defines in this purpose, if we're honest.
It is really middleware, right? I mean, it's
right.
That's needed. Technology is not perfect. Humans usually act as the glue between different technological islands, and RPA just makes it easier. So that's
exactly.
One last question, probably, and I'll look into the comments as well. But the question side, does it mean that all users need to have credentials for Orchestrator to access ActionCenter tasks?
Yeah, so not Orchestrator, but they will need to have a named user ActionCenter license. So you don't need to give an ActionCenter user access to Orchestrator at all. And candidly, they probably wouldn't, but they would need the ability to access ActionCenter. So what you would do is enable that service for that specific user, or on the Orchestrator side, just give them access to the folder, but they won't need credentials to Orchestrator, just to ActionCenter. But from the commercial perspective, they will need a license. Yeah.
Right. And I'm not sure if we addressed this from Whittle and Deborah. I think we did a bit.
I think we did a bit. It comes down to workflow design, essentially, right? So the answer to both of those questions is yes, right? Always the answer is yes. It's going to come down to workflow design on the waiting for the task to complete. What I don't have is how much time a ActionCenter task can sit. So let me ask my internal team and see if there is a maximum time on that. And I will reply back to everyone and get back to you because I don't have an answer for that. I don't know.
Finally, we got a question that
I know you got one. I don't know. I don't know the answer. I'd envision it's probably anywhere to like 30 days if I had to guess, but let me actually get you a concise answer because I'm not entirely sure. KJ, thank you very much for joining us. Oh, no problem.
Your insights are always welcome, and look forward to seeing you at Forward next week.
Yeah, I'll be there. I'll be there Monday night.
Thank you, Ashish, as well. And thanks everyone for joining. Have a nice day.